right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from the part of the world, in any part of the world, sorry. My name is Philip Ademo Olayeko. I coordinate the West African Transitional Justice Center, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this edition of our Distinguished Personality Lecture Series, which is on decoloniality and development in African literary tradition, that will be delivered by none other than Dr. Adaobi Nkeokelonye, who is a social development researcher. Just a brief introduction to the West African Transitional Justice Center, then I'll hand over the platform to the moderator of the event, Dr. Ndidi Njoku, who has graciously accepted to help us steer the ship of the event today. The West African Transitional Justice Center is based in Nigeria. It was designed to bridge the gap between the research and practice of transitional justice in West Africa and Africa as a whole. So our aim is to try to bring scholars and practitioners to this platform to discuss ideas on their research and try to see how we can encourage evidence-based interventions in the field. And today we are glad that we have a scholar practitioner in our midst, um, who, though is an expert on the African literary tradition, is also a development researcher who goes on the field and has worked a lot in terms of promotion of the health and well-being of the female folk, and of course social justice in general, in terms of gender relations in Nigeria and beyond. So without further ado, I would like to hand over the platform to Dr. Ndidi Njoku to introduce the guest speaker and also manage the event. Thank you, everyone, and welcome once again. Dr. Njoku, over to you.
Thank you, Doctor. Am I audible enough?
Yes, you
All
are.
right.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much. Like he has already said, my name is Ndidi Njoku, and I'm here today to moderate today's conversation. So basically, our discussion today will focus on three main issues: decolonization, African development models, and then knowledge production. But rather than going through the normal policy prescription we normally use or development metrics, today's conversation will look at it from literature, fiction generally. So generally, we tend to look at development works or how to describe Africa through evidence or through hard metrics of peace, conflicts, and issues around that. But the question today is what happens when the evidence we need is not found in a database? Or where or is fiction actually the true and honest diagnostic tool that we have for understanding human cost of development models? So basically, like we already know, to lead us through this discussion, we have a scholar that have done lots of work in this area. She specializes in bridging the gap between social development and the humanities. Her work challenges us to rethink development not simply as a technical process, but as a narrative project shaped by history, power, and then storytelling. So please join me to welcome Dr. Adaobi Nkeokelonye. She holds a doctorate degree in literary and cultural studies from Pretoria, Malaysia, and then an MA in development studies from University of Sussex, and then a BA in English language from University of Lagos, Nigeria. She is also a social development researcher with over 22 years of practical experience working with international and local non-governmental organizations on broad spectrum of development issues. Over the past 16 years, she has pursued an interest in establishing the linkages between literature and social development issues. She has documented her learnings on her website, fictioning development. At some point, we'll share the website link so that people can go there and then read further on her blog. So basically, what she does or her work highlights how literature, particularly from the global south, mirrors social development concerns. So, distinguished guests, please join me to welcome Dr. Nkiru and Dr. Adobe. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ndidi, for the generous introduction. And thank you, Dr. Philip, for making sure that this happened. I'm going to be sharing a screen, so I hope we can all see it to start with. Sorry. Can we see this, please?
Yes, we can see
Hello?
it.
Oops, I'm sorry. Okay. So, good afternoon, all, and thank you for offering your time to this. As noted in our invite, this presentation highlights efforts at decolonizing Africa's development models. It focuses on sharing how literature serves as a tool for decolonizing development. I believe that we have an audience with mixed backgrounds, and therefore there is need to provide a background definition of concepts. Starting with what is development. Nobel laureate Amartya Sen defined it as the enhancement of people's living condition. By this definition, it can be assumed that every society wants and strives towards its enhancing its living condition. But the challenge comes when the conditions, the standards, and resources for such enhancement comes from outsiders with little regards to the recipient society. Both Western societies, Western culture, the African cultures have transformed over time. But the perception that the West has achieved modern ways of enhancing their lives while Africa has remained basically traditional is what underpins the concept of um, current modern day development. To position this in history, what we today know as global development was introduced right after the era of colonization and at the end of the Second World War. President Roosevelt and Truman, in their 1940s speech, remarked that the need for a global development agenda. They made a case for embarking on programs that improved and grew the underdeveloped areas, noting that more than half of the world lived in misery and poverty and therefore can benefit from the knowledge and skills of the West to relieve their suffering. Their predecessor, John F. Kennedy, further reinforced the same things, reinforcing the plan to help half of the globe, which constituted of underdeveloped people living in huts and villages, by speeding up the process of modernization and freeing the majority of mankind from poverty. The initiations of these ideas achieved several things, which I'll be discussing. First was that it made the United States of America a formidable player in the conceptualization of development. Then it laid the foundational ideas and political justifications for the establishment of the World Bank in 1944 and the United Nations in 1945, making these organizations the anchor bodies for everything development today. Next was that it's created a rank order society where countries across the world were immediately ranked in categories of developed, developing, and underdeveloped. Then it created a false dichotomy between the developed West, which constituted of the global North, and the developing and underdeveloped countries of the global South. Importantly, what it also did was that it defined poverty and wealth on the global map. The Global Development Agenda became a Western construct, basically, that overlooked and undermined the inherent agencies and structures of local communities in the global south. Consequently, emerging from being underdeveloped to being developed has become a global culture driving the pattern of social change and growth around the world. The Global Development Agenda called for modernization, industrialization, agricultural development, elimination of illiteracy through the promotion of education. It called for eradication of inequality, eradication of hunger and disease, promotion of technical training, economic growth, amongst others. So, to be developed, countries like ours must comply with a foreign development agenda. Compliance granted us constant resource inflows from developed countries in forms of foreign aid and technical assistance, which was administered from the West to the rest through the multilateral agencies like the UN and the World Bank, and also the bilateral agencies like the USAID and the UK aid, Canadian aid, and all of that. The activities surrounding this agenda created an industry now known as the development sector in Nigeria. However, while the activities are based in the global south, the power base of the development industry remains largely in the global north. The underlying power relations inherent in the development practice cannot be ignored. As the saying goes, he who pays the piper calls the tune. For many countries, aligning with this agenda and receiving handouts meant that we lost our agency and became unable to take key decisions on how we want to grow. To put this cost in perspective, recently in 2025, the United States of America, through Donald Trump, withdrew its aid from many countries of the global south. This caused significant stress, unemployment, and loss to many Nigerians. In Kebbi State, for example, concerns were huge over the fractured health system as aid from US government practically sponsored healthcare interventions there. So when US left, it didn't just leave with its money, it left with the data on healthcare within the state, teaching the Kebbi government, the Kebbi people, and at large, the Nigerian people and maybe global society about the cost of dependency. So why decoloniality and development? The colonization of development became important because the development practice mimics colonization. Colonization, like development, is a process that was led by the same countries of the global north, administered by development workers, both foreign and locals, who were positioned as the old missionaries that told us that everything in our culture was bad and everything in our culture had to be replaced. The decolonization mindset means that we as a people begin to recognize that we gave up existing social structures that historically managed resources and community well-being, that we undermined indigenous knowledge systems and standards and adopted unrealistic indexes and indicators for measuring growth in line with Western ideals. The coloniality here in development begins with us unlearning what we have been told is the only way to grow. It is reclaiming our voices, our knowledge, our ways of being that we've long pushed aside. It is rewriting, stories so that they reflect our lived realities and our truths. It is remembering histories that we have silenced. It means resisting systems that define us from the outside. It means reimagining futures shaped from within by us. In the journey of decoloniality, development should not be an imposition. It shouldn't be imposed. It should grow from the roots of our culture. It should grow from our dignity, our collective memory, carried by the people who by us as a people who define our own path to growth. So generally, decolonization means that we seek a development that is people-centered, that is context-specific, and responsive to the diverse realities of our different society. For me as a person, decolonizing development was something that happened long after I had joined the development sector, sorry. So in my early 20s, I had just graduated with a degree in English language, majoring in English literature. There was no clear pathway from this discipline, basically. So I opened up to life's offering. Following my interest to do charity work, my friend turned sister Diola Olunloyo had invited me to advance a career in HIV/AIDS programming, working with in-school youths. I worked with graduates, creating awareness and education across different states in Nigeria on a UNICEF NYC HIV/AIDS program. This became my entry point into the career as a development worker. But when people asked me, what do I do or what sector I worked in, I struggled to explain. I would, prefer to say that I worked in the development sector as a development worker, but that triggered even more questions. They will ask me, what are you developing? Who are you developing? What is the development sector about? I didn't have the confidence in my response, but I believed a lot of us development workers then and perhaps now could not speak of the many concepts and theories of development. We didn't know about the underlying politics or criticisms of development and the drivers of some of the programs that we were working on. It's important to state that, to a degree, our level of ignorance on the holistic nature of development came from the fact that we weren't students or graduates of development studies. Just like me, a large majority of workers in this sector were pulled from different disciplines and we learned on the job. Another side to our not knowing was the kind of knowledge materials that were available to teach us about development. Most of them, in my opinion, were deeply unrelatable and and not so accessible. So my career in the development sector advanced into the knowledge creation space, where I became a rapporteur with ActionAid Nigeria. Work in those days was just about sitting in, listening, and documenting proceedings on different meetings or trainings with development agencies, with stakeholders across the government and non-governmental institutions, and community members and duty bearers. So growing into diverse consultancy roles later in my career exposed me to conducting research, program monitoring and evaluation of different development programs across a broad spectrum of issues. And this further triggered my curiosity to understand my sector. I was gradually observing the patterns of power relations. Communication in this sector was basically top bottom. Even the government officials didn't seem to have power on agenda setting. And where they did, it was a tokenist power, in my opinion. I was gaining some perspectives on what the sector did with time. I knew it was about change and growth in different areas of social life, but I sincerely couldn't define the concepts of development or the arguments around it. So when I got tired of carrying a false sense of confidence, of regurgitating the things that I was told as facts and true, I sought to know more. And within that period, I was privileged to get an offer for a master's degree at the number one institution globally on development studies. I must acknowledge the Institute of Development Studies in Brighton for the space and opportunity it gave me to learn and unlearn and to challenge my positionalities and my assumptions. So as a student, I began to question things. I questioned the suitability of the concepts in the contexts and experiences that I have been familiar with. For example, my area of specialization was gender and agriculture. My learnings provoked thoughts and questions. I pondered on feminism. Was I a feminist or was I a humanist? I questioned data. Where is the evidence that women alone make up 70% of agricultural workforce in many African countries? Why hasn't these figures changed in decades? I questioned whether women only empowerment programs were relevant or appropriate in many Nigerian agricultural societies. Was the development practice itself really altruistic or just a refined form of selfishness where funders were positioned for gain? I draw attention to the early days of my career where, I worked with a support group of persons living with HIV/AIDS. At that time, HIV was a highly stigmatized thing. So to even say that you met or shook hands with someone with HIV meant that other people ran away from you, or wouldn't want to associate or relate with you. So for me, I felt that going into that sector and working within that space was an altruistic thing. But I guess that over time, my experiences were challenging this mindset. I remember participating in a research on utilization of off-grid products by women petty traders in northern or north central Nigeria. That research had great findings and insights, and we were excited to go, share our findings with the funder. My thinking was basically that this was a feasibility study to deliver solar products to women. On the day we walked into the office to discuss our findings with the project lead, we met this pot-bellied white man who didn't care much about courtesy. He just shot his question straight. He said, "Tell me, are the women interested in buying the solar lamps or not?" I was shocked because it wasn't what I was looking for. But, well, that was the beginning of me looking at things and saying, oh, this is all gains after all. I'll draw attention again to another unlearning. Working with rural farmers revealed much about the appropriateness of development concepts in agriculture. If you work in the space of gender and agriculture, for example, you will understand how land reforms and women's ownership of land is positioned as a critical problem. I remember female farmers saying to me that even if they owned land, they will pass it to their sons and not their daughters. So it raises the question on whether advocating for access to land or ownership of land was really important to women in agriculture in Nigeria, in some communities, or whether other things were important. I draw us back to my questions and my critical reflections on the evidence base for the fact that we keep claiming that 70% of women worked in the agricultural workforce in many African countries. So findings from my research 12 years ago
Sorry,
showed that. Hello?
sorry, doctor. Yeah, please. In case you forgotten, your slides are not moving. Just in case you think they are, except you're
Oh,
yet
oh,
to be ready to share them. Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry. Okay,
Okay, you can
thank
start the
you.
slideshow. Yeah.
Okay, can you see that now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I go back to my reflections on this data, on the data that we generate and design programs for people and communities on. So if you look around the internet, it's not an uncommon thing. You're going to see that 70% of agricultural workforce in Africa are made up of women. So 12 years ago, I had gone through this and researched it to find that none of this was rooted in evidence. Yet, even more recently, I still see that big funders, design projects based on this. I was privileged to be an evaluator, to lead a qualitative study for a bank who was funded by a big funder during the COVID-19 as a part of the COVID-19 support to small farmers. So the bank was giving millions of dollars, and was expected to give these loans to over 100,000 smallholder farmers in the north, with a caveat that 70% of these 100,000 farmers must be young women. I led the qualitative part of this study, and it required that I engaged with the top management of the bank who were in charge of the project. One statement stood out for me, which further validated my own findings. One of the bankers said that this project was premised on the fact that women constituted 70% of the workforce in smallholding. But where are these women? I don't need to say to us that this project failed. And there are so many examples of white elephant projects and poorly planned projects that makes you really question the sincerity in the sector and the values that they put up. Beyond the reflections I have shared, my learnings and my most important achievement from IDS was finding a new way of learning and a new way of knowing about development and having the confidence to share it. I found that literature, especially in the form of the novel, taught me more about development issues than any academic report or research paper did. The more I learned about concepts of development, the more I realized that I knew some of these things from the novels I read. On the screen is the novel by Bessie Head, the South African writer. I'm not sure if many of us know her, but if you engage Bessie Head's work, When the Rain Clouds Gather, it gives an in-depth understanding about the consequences of introducing Western agricultural models in communities where they didn't fit, and the potentials for conflicts and cultural alterations. For lovers of literature, some of these old literary gems on the screen might be familiar. Olu Adegoke, for example, taught me about bribery and corruption in very creative ways. Achebe's Man of the People gave a description of what corruption meant, and his portrayal of the government system or the governance system in Nigeria was so good that it earned him an exile. I think about So Long a Letter by Mariam Abba, the Senegalese writer. And in those pages, you find dialogues between characters, Ramatulaye and Dauda Dieng, discussing the lingering absence of young women in African politics and creating opportunities for us to ask that projects that focus on bringing young women into politics and whether they have actually made considerations to see if the young women wanted to be in politics, why, and all of that. I think this novel did a good job at capturing that. I could also give example of Elechi Amadi's The Concubine. It taught me more about gender inequality as a concept than any research paper did. We look at Wendy Wallace's novel, Daughters of Dust. It humanized the practice of FGM, female genital mutilation, in ways that academic papers couldn't. Another example could be Alice Walker's novel, The Color Purple. There is this thing called the concept of time poverty, which sometimes I struggle to, know how to communicate. But I felt that this novel was, a really good example of capturing it, and did a good example of capturing it. With all I have shared, most of these things are, positioned and are placed in my blog, Fictioning and Development. Sometime in 2013, I thought that it was important to begin to share my learnings. I started sharing on a column in a national newspaper, and thereafter migrated to sharing on my website. So from 2013 until now, there has been, a lot of efforts at scouring through novels and narrative piece to see how they represent development issues, and to encourage people to begin to look at that perspective as a way of learning and knowing about development. But it was also important to advance this a bit. how was I going to translate my learnings from these activities into the work I did as a researcher, as a social development researcher? In 2015, I got an opportunity from the UNFPA to conduct a research on female genital mutilation and cutting in Nigeria. But there was a lot of, I was given a lot of freedom to decide how this report went. And I thought it was time to introduce, you know, a report that was captured in a narrative style, a report that also amplified the voices of the people and not necessarily, the voice of the funder or what the funder wanted to see. I say this because over time in my work as a researcher, I have seen that the views and the realities of rural people are really not well represented. And this has created distrust. I could remember working in Nasarawa State, for example, and we had organized a focus group discussion for rural women. They had come and were all seated to engage in our discussion. But I noticed they were not forthcoming. And I kept asking why. So one of them came up and said to me, "Can I please change my pencil and take a pen instead to ensure that everything they said I am capturing and I wouldn't leave there to clean it off and write something else as other people did?" That was a bit of an aha moment because it told me that a huge distrust is being built between the rural people and us, and that comes from communicating their needs and not having it addressed. So in documenting the report for UNFPA, I ensured that the stories that were told in ways that the people themselves will recognize themselves and their voices in that story. That was an effort at, reinventing the wheel, sort of, on how we made knowledge materials accessible through the format and the structuring and all of that of it. The question then would be on through the years of working with fiction, through the years of working on development, how do I perceive narrative fiction versus the academic data that I used? I must say that as in comparing narrative fiction and academic data, there is no doubt that academic data has its strengths. It follows rigid methodologies, it's systematic, it can be depersonalized, it can be less biased, it can be actionable and replicable. On the other hand, I'm not going to deny the strength of fiction. The narrative fiction reveals the human elements often ignored or depersonalized in academic accounts, representing complex, localized issues, revealing deeper truths about human conditions that statistics may obscure. Scholars argue that the most robust understanding of development comes from holding these two distinct forms of knowledge in tension. And to be sincere, I completely agree with them. But to be able to grow this body of knowledge, it was important to also find out if literature can be used as a source of data for analytical discourse in development research. I was privileged to be self-sponsored in conducting my PhD, which commenced nearly a decade ago. And that meant that I had some, power in choosing the topics I wanted to. And I had focused my studies at looking at how fiction served as, base data. The questions were basically about the cultural impacts and influence of embracing development ideations. I utilized adapted frameworks, Alan Tutton's theory of developmental idealism. I explored the Yamatoto's fourfold frameworks of remedial approach. The study was basically limited to the core spaces of imagined the imagined societies presented by African writers. I drew references from related events in African history. And basically, my research was designed to offer value to the UNESCO agenda of cultural preservation. The research further exposed me to so many other literatures by African writers. One of them, which really highlighted issues of cultural extinction, was this one by Osita Amakezi, The Last Cover. In the previous slide, I had shared the work of Oke Ndibe, Foreign Gods Inc., Chuma Nwokolo, The Extinction of Menai. Going through this literature, I needed to be able to validate my studies, my knowings, my findings over the years. And I was pleased to find most of this literature is a valid source of knowledge. For example, you would find that across most of these literatures, we found characters that were alien to the culture of the place and that present and represent as agents of development, that were either stealing artifacts or impoverishing the custodian cultures or introducing ideas that were alien to the culture. Across the novels, there was also a preference for development ideation. People preferred the modern. People adapted Western values in the imagined society. This manifested in language choices of character, the desire they express for materialism, their sense of individualism, and the idealization of city lives. Education was a value across most of these novels, especially Western education. Then the Western style democracy was also a stronger form of governance, diminishing the traditional systems of governance. The family systems were generally nuclear and small, and gender egalitarianism was something that was established. From these studies, I found that many African and post-colonial writers had long pushed for decolonizing developments by interrogating the assumptions, failures, and the unintended consequences of development interventions, revealing how they may reproduce inequality, dependency, or cultural erasure. In Extinction of Menai, for example, the cultural genocide of the Menai people happened as a result of the sterility and deaths provoked by spurious development and humanitarian aids offered by a British company, the Trevi Pharmaceuticals. I think that's what it's called. Parts of the things I looked out for in this study was the analysis of the causalities of cultural loss and cultural extinction. I found that while some losses in the novels were directly caused by the application of development practice, such as aid, others could have been implied and linkable to dominant values. For example, the traditional medicine was abandoned for modern medicine in one of the novels. Modern languages and its variants replaced local languages. Traditional systems of leadership was replaced by the Western style democracy. And the direct consequences of young people's idealization of city life is the alteration of the elderly care system. All of these things are things that, even though are fictionalized, could be relatable in our very society. Recently, I followed the death of a 6-year-old and the immediate burial. And one of the things that stood out for me was that the grave was being dug by older people. There was no young person in the village to dig the grave as would be expected. These are really signs of, changes that occur in real life as a result of people's beliefs that, their growth lies in the patterns or the pathways that are established by the West. So, generally, decolonizing development is about unlearning, as I said before. It's about reclaiming, rewriting, remembering, resisting, and reimagining things. And if we are to decolonize development, I believe that literature is a fundamental tool for the decoloniality of development in Africa. I have been able to show to us the presence of or the strong linkages between literature and development. But I would be ending this presentation right now because I'd be happy to get suggestions and contributions from you on how I could, for example, drive this study forward. To start up with the suggestions, one of my ideas is to develop a glossary of literatures that address development issues, because for the average person on the street, they don't know what literature talks about what. So I think a glossary might be a good way to start. Another way might be to advocate for curriculum reviews to incorporate literature as an additional source of knowledge for development studies in schools, perhaps at secondary and undergraduate levels. I'm happy to open the floor to hear from you, and thank you for giving me time to talk about my work. So, Dr. Philip, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nkeokelonye, for that wonderful presentation. I'm Dr. Ndidi Njoku. It's your turn to moderate the Q&A. Thank you.
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, it's a limited time to unpack everything. At some point, I thought we should just allow you to keep speaking because I feel you still have a lot more to share with us.
Mm.
And you've touched on so many things, shrinking funding in the development space, and the impact is actually having around, especially in the global south, and then the lack of deep knowledge most of us who work in the development space have around theories surrounding that. Then you talked about data and then disconnect between reality and all of that. So the one that stood out for me, and then I know you mentioned that but I like the conversation you raised about it's not just you presenting the problem, but you're also thinking along the line of finding solution to that. So the glossary will actually go a long way. I know in most schools there is already literature, at least for secondary school. I think it's for some, even to university, is compulsory for some courses if you want to do that. So I don't know how, but I think it's a good way to start and is a good way to go. But the conversation you made around women and then the disconnect between reality and then the data we have. But my question is, in this new era of shifting funding and all of that, just help me to deepen the conversation a bit more. How do we ensure that we are not just counting numbers, but we're also hearing directly from the people who are being affected by these issues?
Okay. Thank you, Ndidi. I guess, should I listen to other questions or should I respond to this first?
Yeah, I think we can take
Okay,
the other question in the chat box so that.
Yeah.
okay. So maybe, Dr. Philip, is it okay for people to unmute and ask their questions, or do
Yes,
we just
yes.
have it dropped?
So
Okay,
the thing
maybe
is
whoever
the
has a question can raise his or her hand and then unmute to ask your question.
perfect. But there are
Okay.
two in the chat box already.
Okay.
Dr. Nkekelo, can you see the questions or should I read them out for you?
Okay. So I would need to look at the chat box.
You can help her
Okay.
read. You can read, please.
Okay, so Ijo Maritas is asking, I'm especially interested in how literature can drive development as someone in Nigeria film space. Do you think movies can contribute to this drive for development, especially as many Nigerian books are getting made into film? Then Carlos is asking, okay, have you considered a comparative study with similar works from Latin America?
All right. Thank you
So maybe
very
we'll
much.
start with this for now, then we can. Or
Okay,
have
so
more?
I'd answer to Ijoma Richards first. Um, I think that films are part of narrative materials and they hold particular value in this discussion. But I can't sincerely tell you that I have done a lot of work in films. But what I can tell you is that with regards to films um, reenacting novels in many cases, I have found that a lot is lost in translation. A lot is lost in the shift between the different forms of material. Films are basically 2 hours, 1 hour plus, and it cannot condense the facts of the novel. But it definitely does have its space. I have seen films on important issues like the FGM, and I can tell you that they are equally as moving. So I think that films can be utilized. They are critical tools for communicating change, communicating critical thinking, and the rest. So there is definitely a place for it. I hope the question is answered. The second question is on whether I have explored the Latin American literature, right? Hello?
Yes, please. Yes, please. I think that's the second question.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so, all right, fine, thank you. So I have tried to read a few works from the Latin American space. And one of the things I have done over the years is to ensure that when I walk into a new country, I go into the bookshop to look for what their fiction looks like and, and what issues it is communicating about them. I have not visited Latin America. I am sorry, but I understand the need to expand or broaden the species of this study, and I am very interested in doing that. So, a first step would be to perhaps recommend to me literatures from Latin America you think I can look at and be able to now drive these kinds of discussion around it. I hope that answers the question.
Dr. Olayoka has already mentioned that this is an opportunity for you to collaborate with Carlos. So hopefully maybe he will get back to you and then that can take off from there. So like I mentioned, if anybody has a question, please raise your hand and then unmute and then ask your question. Um, all right, while we wait for that to come in. So I know you've worked in the development space for quite a number of years, and then the conversation about the particular one you mentioned where you have older men begin a grave for a young person. And
Yeah.
then the issues we'll be having around conflict issues in Nigeria, you mentioned democracy and all of that. Um, Maybe because it's my space now, I don't know if you've talked in that direction because I know there have been a lot of development actors who are working in this space. For the last 20 years, we've had a lot of issues trying to address the issues in the Northeast, and then that's not working. If there are going to be a recommendation, African driven recommendation now, I don't know what your thoughts would be in that direction.
Okay, so I think I did I worked in the mining sector and it gave me the opportunity to visit the Mambila Plateau and engage with communities. One of the key issues in this space is the issue of insecurity, conflicts between, headers and the rest. And funny enough, these are things you may not expect to find in literature. But the book Burning Grass, I think it's Cyprian Quincy or so, was a novel that sort of gave more insight as to, you know, understanding the tribal and the values of the tribes within the conflict spaces. So I believe there are works out there that can give you further insight. But I mean, in the sea of novels, there's really so much I can read. I'm also happy to now begin to explore works in this thought direction you have expressed to see what I could suggest and recommend to you in the near future.
Yeah, but if someone is to suggest, what do you think a novelist, someone like you, maybe not you, Sha, but a novelist knows about Africa, right? Or
Yeah.
around addressing issues that a development practitioner may not be able to, grasp.
So, would we look at it in the perspective of having novelists, you know?
Yeah, as a novelist, given your knowledge and everything, yeah.
I'm not a novelist.
A fictional, right? What will I not call you? Development, okay.
Yeah, as a development worker. But I do think
Experts.
that yes, writers have a role to play in this direction. Yes.
Mm,
Well, they have not been well incorporated into the development sector, in my opinion. You know, they're
mm,
custodians of knowledge and they have the skills to help our work, but the gap is there. I don't think
mm.
they are being involved, they are being, engaged appropriately. So these are also maybe suggestions and considerations to make.
To deep, okay.
Yeah. Do we have more questions?
Yes, I think there's one more question now. Dr. Philip as well. In a climb driven by orature, how can we further enhance the credibility of using fiction to inform the implementation of development projects?
Um,
Did you get
I,
that?
I,
Okay.
I did. I sincerely think that, I think in my presentation, I did suggest that scholars have recommended that these two forms of knowledge have to be held in tension. So my presentation is not to say that, oh, we can jettison data and look at
Mm,
purely fiction, but I think there is a place for fiction to help our understanding of issues, also create further insights in on the issues we are dealing with. But we must again still marry it with data, which is context specific, which is also people centered. I hope that helps.
mm. Okay, we have another question by Charles Adini. Um, okay, he said he loves your accurate and dynamic way you delve into different areas. I also love the development of your experience. Literature drives development, no doubt, but literature is personal experience or writings. I am glad you found that across literature that they reflect more Western worldview and paradigms for gender, education, and the rest. I think we can move from literature to gold standard research like the qualitative studies you've done and publish them too. Do you think research can boost our literature and then how?
Okay, one thing I know about writers is that they do a lot of research. So, as much as we feel that literature is personal story, it's a bit of it sort of undermines the value that these writers put in, the work they put in. Yeah. If if we're talking of Extinction of Menai, for example, where I talked about the genocide happening, being as a result of a failed vaccine project. You don't need to look far in our history to find out that it happened in Kanu some years ago, with Pfizer and the rest. So, as much as you want to say it's a personal story, it's relatable, it's research based, it's just delivered in a format that is unique to itself. And that in no way discounts it. For whatever value it adds, I think we can adapt it to and utilize it for whatever work we want to do. So, yes, qualitative studies, which I have conducted, has its space. And I must also say to you that you cannot, it can be personalized. I, as someone who's analyzing qualitative study has a bit of my positionalities and my lens, and my experience in interpreting the data I see. So we are not going to dismiss that. But does it make it any less an important data? No, it doesn't. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think there's
I
another
really
question just before
appreciate
transition.
if there are suggestions for me and not questions. I'm still in a learning process, so I'm also happy to have suggestions.
Yeah, there's one other question by Ebode Yetoro. If I can call your attention to that, Dr.
Okay.
Njoku, just before the one you read.
Yes, it's a question from Oyebode Oyetoro. To what extent does censorship affect people's voice when literature is to be used for fostering development? And what are the solutions to the challenges of censorship and the use of literature for development purpose?
Presently, literature is not used for development purpose, largely. The whole essence of this discussion is to begin to give it some traction. And
Okay.
yeah, so it's not something that is commonly used. A lot of people make arguments for it, but there are really no supporting experiences or documents or materials, to drive the discussion. So that answers the question. And regarding censorship, I don't think I have the experience of literature or novels themselves being particularly censored. I know about movies, I know about, other visual materials, but music, I don't know much about literature, but I'd be happy to learn a lot more, on that.
All right. And like I mentioned, if you really want to talk to Ada, you can as well unmute, raise your hand and then unmute so that I can ask your question. But then there's another question by Uche Igwe. Great presentation, Dr. Ada. Decolonizing development is a great idea. Apparently, there's a consensus that prescriptive, that colonized development has failed woefully. Even decolonized development will likely fail too. For me, development can only happen to the willing. There are few accidents in development. I guess it's not really a question, but that's his view. I don't know if you agree with it or not.
I appreciate Dr. Igwe. Dr. Igwe was my colleague in ideas, and he remains sharing me in this path of findings that I do. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, if I may, just a little bit curious about your work in terms of fiction and development, in terms of your digital interventions. Can you speak a bit to what you've been doing in terms of writing or blogs and stuff like that, digital interventions in terms of fiction and development, just um, to give us an insight based on the website you wanted to share earlier. Yeah.
Okay, I did share the website as part of the presentation. So blogging in this area started in 2013, and that's over a decade ago. And it's been basically sharing what I see and what I learn. Has it been engaged actively? No. Have I been very consistent? Not necessarily, because there are times that I have to go back to work and earn the money. So I would jettison my blog and my study interests. Yeah, but I hope it gets better. That's all I can say. But for now, what we have on the blog and basically most of what I have done.
Yeah, just a bit of interest on the themes. Are there specific themes that you have treated or stuff like that? I also noticed, I mean, through you, I've heard about Mr. Chuma Okolo. If he, as an author, is also here with us. So we'll be honored to see if he has any insight to share, in terms of how literature can indeed be much more impactful in terms of decolonizing our development trajectory. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. I guess he's being called out and he should respond.
Yes, I've really been called out, so I have to appear. I think there was somebody who raised the question about censorship. I think one of the biggest issues in how well our literature reflects our reality is not just censorship from the point of view of a dictator, hunting down writers, but from people self-censoring themselves for various purposes. You can imagine how different our literature would be, for instance, if you are not afraid of your parents reading your writing. You may have, for instance, come from a puritanical background where parents have certain religious beliefs, and your personal convictions based on what you think and what you know are leading you in a particular direction. But then you have a sense of a responsibility to your parents' feelings. I use parents just as an example. So there's a lot of self-censorship that goes on in the lives of writers in protecting the feelings, perceptions, even delusions of communities for whom they have an affection. So all these have a very dangerously thwarting impact on how well our literature reflects our lived experiences. So this will always remain a major deficit in how well our literature can be used for either developmental practices or whatever. So there's that area of the danger of literature being either proselytizing tool where it is for the use of maybe spreading religious or even tribal or whatever agendas there are, where people come to literature with a preconceived view, not so much to reflect reality as it is, but reality as, people want the writer wishes to make it. But having said that as a caveat, I totally agree with the basic thesis of this session, which is that literature has a profoundly a profound message to relay to development, and particularly when the writer operates more like a priest in saying, "This is my truth," whether it is for the purpose of reflecting what the ancestors had to say or what they would have had to say were they here. So that's my quick intervention. Otherwise, thank you for organizing the session and for the presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And good to hear from you. Back to Dr. Nkeokelonye. Dr. Philip asked a question about your blog. If you can just, the recent one you just shared, if you can just talk us through that. The one you released in March, Daughters of the Manduria, the one you spoke about India, and then the late infanticide, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay, the daughters. So again, I am not limited to African fiction or African
Yeah, I
novels.
noticed.
Yeah. So like I said, if I did travel and I found an interesting literature about a place or an issue, I'll bring it on board. And female infanticide is an issue that, I mean, really depresses you if you have to get into it. And I think the writer, I'm not sure I can remember her name, I've engaged a lot of literature recently. I think the writer did a really good job at bringing the issues out. And I tried to marry it with what I see in films and documentaries. If you look properly at the presentation of that blog, you're going to see links at the beginning to movies that describe or further give, information about these practices. And this has to do with real people. real experiences and all of that. So it again shows that literature is not entertainment. Novels are not entertainment. They are dealing with real issues that are thoroughly researched and in alignment with the
Mm.
societies that they are representing.
Thank you. So I'm still expecting questions. Anyone that has, so just send it to the chat box or just unmute and then ask your question. And then, like she has already asked, she's more interested on how to strengthen her work, and then suggestions around that was actually welcome, and we're expecting more of that. Thank you.
Part of my expectation is that people can also suggest novels they have read or something that they think I may want to, I could look at. So, and if that's not coming, it means that we are not novel people.
Are there thematic areas, are there, or just novels generally? Are there specifics you're looking for?
Recently, I've been interested in pursuing themes on climate change. I know about Ben Okri's, I think, Famished Road, or so, I can't
I'm sure
remember.
there.
Yeah, I think that's, but I haven't been able to fully engage. And I think I was in I think I would need country specific recommendations if it's possible. Yeah. I've not been to a lot of countries, but I've tried to pick on literatures from
Mm.
countries where I visit, and still in the process of reviewing some that I got recently. So I'll be happy to have recommendations in that light. And perhaps again, for people in the academic, the question is, are there potentials for, incorporating literature as
Mm.
a source of, authentic knowledge and development studies within their universities and their spaces? So, and if that is, are there other universities to look out for, who would help advance this body of work?
For that,
Yeah.
is it Nigeria specific now?
Anywhere,
Or
I mean,
Anyway, yeah.
anywhere.
Sorry, if you permit me to quickly jump in.
please do.
I think I understand the fact that there may not be a lot of contribution in this field, and it's kudos to you because this is like an uncharted territory that you're trying to open up, especially when you try to connect literature and fiction. I remembered reviewing a book for Premium Times on Boko Haram. I've forgotten the title of the book. It's been like 5 or 6 years ago. But this was a sort of therapy that was arranged by a civil society organization. I'm not sure whether it was Global Rights. I think it was Global Rights, yeah. It was a collaboration between Global Rights and some other organization. And it was to allow victims of the Boko Haram insurgency to tell their stories as a form of therapy. So I think they were kept, in a space for a while for a sort of recovery, and they were told to write, about the experiences as a way of leading to healing. And so, apart from even so, this for me, it's something that has to do with post-conflict peace building, which is an integral part of development. I mean, that's a sort of developing communities that have um, suffered a lot of damage due to conflict. And I'm also aware, for instance, in our next book presentation that I will try to announce before we end this topic, we're going to look at fictional narratives on the Holocaust, for instance. And I know that there's a lot of work that has been done, in this regard, where people have tried to look at how stories have been told. And it's two ways. It's either these stories, like Mr. Okolo mentioned earlier, could either have a positive impact of leading to development, or they could be weaponized for propaganda of certain actors. And so it's good for us to also interrogate what this is. I personally would not be disposed to the valuation of perhaps research, qualitative research, whatever that means, or quantitative research, has been more valuable than fiction. I think each of these genre or each of these types of scholarship have their own values. It's like when people try to make distinctions between journalists. You see, there's a journalistic writing and there's an academic writing. And when you want to go into historical research, for instance, you start running to the archives to cite newspapers in texts that you want people to hold as very valid and legitimate. So I think we part of the decolonization process should be that we start evaluating literature, and literature not just in terms of text. I'm talking generally in the multimodal context of film, of music. I mean, all of this stuff have their own values, whether historical, whether factual, and they must be respected. Fine, there could be some creative um, intonations here and there, but that should not in any way undermine the factual relevance of these works of art. Because this, for me, it's what has also undermined the value that humanities had to scholarship these days. A lot of people are tended towards looking at figures, and you think that figures resolve problems. But for instance, in the field of conflict studies, you know that this is actually not the case. This is just a way of justifying demands for grants. Other than that, on the field itself, and I think both of you, the lecturer and the moderator, know this better than myself, it's a whole different ball game that you have to adjust and rework and do all of these things together. So I think it's important that we respect literature in its own field and attach the same value that we attach to other modes of methodology in terms of production of scholarship, whether in Africa, or beyond. Thank you very much. That's what I just wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Dr. Philip. Thanks for that.
Just so to, add to what he has said, because I've noticed recently, not recently, most actors now within the development space, you see increased shifts. Majorly, you have people who are implementing maybe dialogue and things like that. But most times now, you see that most organizations are also going to films. You have what's it, live theater within communities reenacting and then recreating their experience and all of that. And it is actually going a long way in addressing some of the issues that, especially at least the ones that I've seen usually in the Northwest. You see live theaters, people recreating and all of that. So most times not just around written text, and then even songs. I know there are so many genres of literature and all of that, but I think things are actually changing. Maybe we'll still have a long way to go, but I think people are actually going back, to recreate and assess some of this knowledge. Thank you. I don't know if any other person has any other question. Okay, why that comes up, I know from your blog, it seems you've written a lot around India, maybe because you studied there, and then Nigeria,
No, no,
right?
no. I
So
didn't study in India. I visited a
you
number of
visited.
times.
Oh, okay, all
And then
right.
I
So,
have a
so
lot
I
of
want.
friends who would sometimes offer me books, or
Oh,
recommend.
okay.
Yeah.
Because it seems like you have a bit of knowledge about, just for you to compare what's the culture and then everything between there and then Nigeria for us to find the link between the two. That's
Oh,
fine.
no, no, I haven't, but I must say that India is rich in literature,
Mm,
culture, and then they're also very strong in development. So, for their cultures, I don't know about, and I have to read. Like recently, I visited Albania, and I was able
mm,
to get a literature from one of the big writers in Albania. I'm looking to read it. I don't know too much about Albania, but it would mean that I sit down and look at the history and other, knowledge materials from the country to be able to put some piece together as to what the novel I'm reading is talking about. Yeah, I hope that helps.
So where's the next place you're going off to?
I'm really open to someone in this space inviting me.
But if you are to pick, what would that be? Where would that be?
What country would I like to visit?
Yeah, or is there like a specific
That's
text you were
somebody. That's
interested
somebody
in
in the
that?
space. Somebody in the space asking you because she can take you to where you want to go to.
Yeah, no, Carlos has actually sent me an invite on
So we're going
LinkedIn.
to Latin
We
America.
will be exploring Latin America soon.
Okay.
All right.
But is it
I
like
think we. Yeah, I
She's
think
asking.
if there are no questions, then we'll try to wrap up the event. So if there's anyone who has questions, you can or comments or a last word. We'll just take that in the next um 5 minutes.
Hello?
Otherwise,
hi?
Hello?
Hi,
Hi,
we can
everyone.
hear you.
Okay, just
okay.
checking if you can all hear me. My name is Adeola Lawyer, and I was going to be content keeping quiet because I'm not a scholar. I'm just an avid admirer of Dr. Nkeokelonye. But I've listened to everything you all have said. Or before I say what I want to say, I want to say congratulations, Ada, for stepping forward, for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. Apologies that I'm panting. I'm in the gym, but I need to say this because it's important because I'm hearing this across all the questions you've all asked and the comments you've all made. And I'm throwing this at you, Ada. I think you're sitting on a pathway that is going to be needed for a long time in the development space. And it's an area that is not yet charted, just like Dr. Njoku said. And I'm just wondering, and I'm throwing this out to all of us, how to help you advance this. You may need to start to look at organizations that provide grants for women or fellowships that provide grants for women so that you can really focus on this and build on it and institutionalize it. I've never heard it anywhere in my over 20 years of working in development in terms of what you're trying to do. And it's so valuable now because a lot of changes are happening. Look at what has been going on in the global space and how the development sector is being changed drastically because of politics, international politics, and all of that, and which is going to worsen the situation for countries in the South. So please, I don't want you to take this lightly. I want you to please begin to explore. And I'm throwing this back at all of us who are in this space where you know access to grants or fellowships that can support this work that Ada is trying to do, because it will benefit not just us, but younger development specialists or professionals or practitioners that are coming after us. Because I personally believe we've not done enough. We've been working in the development space for so many years. And like Ada said, we all had to grapple to learn and find our way and define our way. But why do we need to continue to struggle when we now have so much access or compared to 20 years ago? So Ada, congratulations on this. I think you are onto something that is gold. And I really, really pray that you have access to the right funding and resources that will enable you build on this properly to do your comparative analysis across different continents, choosing strategic countries like you've mentioned, India, Nigeria, in Africa, other countries, that you can just spotlight on. You don't need to get too many countries. You just need to pick the big players in each continent, focus on them, build on them, and begin to research their literature. And I promise you, it's going to serve humanity beyond when you also, leave the world. So that's my thoughts. And thank you so much for sharing again with us today. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
Thanks.
you.
If you were listening to the beginning of my presentation, Adiola Olunloyo held my hands into the development sector. So I'm kind of honored that she's here today to listen and then that she's making contributions. Thank you, Dee, as always. I appreciate you. Thank you.
And just to add to it, thank you, Adeola, for speaking out. Because imagine she would have kept quiet all through the whole conversation. So it's really good that you spoke up around this. But then it raised a question for me. Most times when you're doing your um policy work and all of that, you're asked to consult secondary data, right? To do literature review and all of that. Maybe this is just for all of us now. If we are to incorporate literature, as in what I'm just thinking what that methodology will look like, right? Because I know we have, like I mentioned, about oral literature and all of that. It may not necessarily be so secondary. When people say desk review, you're reviewing desk review of secondary, basically development related literature. I hope you're understanding what I'm saying, but not necessarily fictional text, like where you're now moving into. I'm just wondering within my head. You don't need to respond to it. Maybe just for us to think through. So if that methodology is to be incorporated, I'm just thinking what that would look like.
I think that qualitative methods,
Mm,
um, textual analysis are also things we can adopt to be able
mm.
to introduce literature into core development, research.
Research, yeah.
Um, yes, yes. If you needed to fleshing up a context and the literature, for example, focuses within the study setting or the study issue, um,
Mm,
it, it's it's okay to borrow it and reference it appropriately, and I've
mm.
probably seen a few places where that is done.
Okay,
So
okay.
um, I think it's possible.
Yeah,
All right.
can I jump in again? Sorry.
Yes,
Please
I
yes.
do.
love that. I love that. I love your question on that. But again, I'll go back to the challenge with the humanities and the contest between social science. What I've studied over time is that the humanities has been displaced by both the social sciences. The social sciences is being displaced by the sciences. The sciences is now being displaced by technology with the era of artificial intelligence. And it's always following the same logic to reduce the value of particular fields of endeavors. And I know that one of the things I think perhaps your last but one slide was talking about your future project was something on curriculum review or curriculum development. And so it's important for us to stop, the decolonization process is to stop following the canons that we have that is present at the moment and go inwards to rethink how we can make these things organically possible. How can we develop fiction and development as a field of study within its own right, without recourse to what people in the social sciences would think, without recourse to what people in policy would think, without recourse to what, because these are the things that restrict fields from thriving in and of themselves. And so, for I am even willing to partner with you in terms of developing this curriculum. In fact, that's part of the objectives of our center. To help develop curriculum on transitional justice, for instance, on the African continent, because a lot of things that we have followed has been copy and paste, and it's not lasted for more than a year or two, and then you have to write your donor report, and that's it, and there's no follow-up. But I think if we want to embed some of these interventions within the academic institutions, within the academia, and make it something that is sustainable, then we need to start thinking of developing methods in and of themselves. Not to forget that people were thriving before the introduction, and I'm not trying to romanticize the past, but the fact is that it's not as if these things that were done in the past that were based on oral tradition had no value of themselves, or they were not leading to development. There was no contribution before this quantitative dominance, in the field of epistemology. So can we rethink and go back to some of these methods and see how we can add value to them and bring them into the present? And we have technology to help us to do that in any case, at the present moment. So my submission would be that let us think of these fields in and of themselves, and see how we can organically develop a way to establish them, as fields of interventions and fields of endeavors. And that's the coloniality, I think, that we're talking about. Yeah, thank you very much. I think we have like 4 minutes before.
Thank you. Okay, before you announce the next topic for next month, maybe Ada, if you have closing comments just before we wrap up.
I think so much gratitude goes to Dr. Philip. He's pursued me for years to ensure that I take myself seriously. And I've run for years, and he has constantly continued to reinforce the importance of what I do. I thank him, and I thank him for what he does, in a space where all of us are chasing money and we don't have a lot of time to dedicate to things like this. He's done outstandingly well. And I'm sending you a hug, Dr. Philip. Thank you very much. And just keep doing what you do. And blessings to you. Thank you to everyone that has listened. My email, someone is raising her hand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she has my
Can
son.
maybe in 2 minutes? Okay, we can unmute. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, I just wanted to use this time to say a big thank you to Dr. Nkeokelonye. This has been an eye-opening session, especially for we people who are not into the development space. This was very enlightening and the presentation was on point. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's a
Thank
short
you.
one. Thank you so much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Dr. Philip, you say you want to announce the topic for next month?
Yes, please. I don't know whether you can see it. So the poster will be out tomorrow. We're going to have our author spotlight event next month, which is response to Nazi perpetration in fiction, complicity and continuities. Plus, promises to be another exciting encounter. So look out for it on our different platforms, and we invite you to join us. So, on that note, I would love to thank Dr. Adaobi Nkeokelonye, for your wonderful presentation. Thank you for gracing our platform with your wealth of experience. Thank you for what you do as well as a practitioner and scholars, treading new frontiers of knowledge and trying to push them beyond. Even though you are saying you are not prepared for it, I know that you are more than prepared and you are able to, achieve all of this. Dr. Ndidi Njoku, thank you very much for expertly moderating this session. I know I jumped on you and I jagged you, and as always, you were quite supportive and you've delivered immensely. So we're grateful to you as a center, and we look forward to having you on this platform. Thank you for all you do for development as well. Thank you for those who are joining our platform for the first time. Thank you for those who have always been here with us, members of our community. We're grateful to have you around, and we look forward to um, seeing you grace this platform in the near future. So I think that will be all from us, and we wish you the very best for the rest of the day on whatever part of the world you are in. So take care and bye for now.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.